For 2 decades, American audiences welcomed a familiar figure into their living rooms, a tall, stoic lawman who embodied the very soul of frontier justice. James Arness, as Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, became more than just a character. He became a fixture of American television, a symbol of strength and order in an era hungry for heroes. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the dust of Dodge City finally settled, Arness retreated not into fanfare or bright lights, but into stillness. Behind that towering frame and steady voice was a man drawn more to quietude than applause. While many of his contemporaries chased headlines and late-night appearances, James Arness did something different. He stepped back. He let the curtain fall. And in doing so, he preserved a life of calm dignity far removed from the chaos of the industry that once made him a household name. When he passed in 2011, it was not with the pomp of a press conference or the pageantry of a star-studded farewell. It was in peace, in the sanctuary of his Brentwood home, surrounded by the quiet comforts he'd carefully chosen. But as time goes on, even legends risk being forgotten. And the stories they leave behind, sometimes visible in the worn floorboards of a now empty home, or whispered in the rustle of letters never sent, begin to fade. One such story lies in the solemn stillness of an abandoned mansion in Minneapolis, once his, now overtaken by vines and dust. Another lives in the enduring praise of war veterans and charitable causes touched by his silent generosity. And perhaps the most enduring memory of all remains etched into television history. An image of a lone marshal standing tall in the fading light, refusing to bend in the face of chaos. This is not just a story about fame. It's about the shape a life takes when fame is stripped away. It's about the resilience of a man who faced unspeakable personal tragedies, but never lost his sense of duty. It's about the actor who could command a screen without raising his voice, and the human being who gave generously while asking for nothing in return. In the chapters that follow, we'll journey from his quiet childhood in Minnesota to the brutal battlefields of Italy during World War II, and on to the sound stages of Hollywood's golden age. We'll explore the homes he built, the family he loved, the grief he carried, and the legacy he left behind. Because James Arness wasn't just a television star, he was a man of his time, and a man who transcended it. And so we begin not with the crack of a pistol or the chase of a villain, but with a moment of pause, a breath, a glance backward into a life marked not only by achievement, but by depth, grace, and a quiet strength that never sought the spotlight, but earned it all the same. Long before the spurs and badge, before the name James Arness was etched into the annals of television history, there was simply Jim, a tall, soft-spoken boy growing up beneath the broad skies of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Born on May 26, 1923, to Ruth, a newspaper columnist, and Rolf, a businessman of Norwegian descent, Arness came of age in a household where words mattered and quiet strength was the norm. He was the elder of 2 sons, his younger brother Peter, who would one day become known to audiences as Peter Graves, sharing his dreams and adventures through the formative years. The Arness family, anchored by their Methodist faith and Midwestern sensibilities, lived simply. James attended public school and took odd jobs to help support the family, delivering groceries and hauling loads for a local jewelry wholesaler. These were not glamorous years, but they were foundational ones, steeped in discipline, humility, and the quiet kind of grit that would later define both the actor and the man. College was the next step. In 1942, James enrolled at Beloit College in Wisconsin, just as the world around him teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The war in Europe was escalating, and the United States had entered the conflict following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Like many young men of his generation, duty called louder than lectures or classrooms, and by early 1943, he had been drafted into the United States Army. What followed would alter not just the course of his life, but the shape of his body and soul. Trained as a rifleman, Arness was deployed to the front lines in Italy during one of the most harrowing campaigns of the Second World War. It was during the fierce and bloody Battle of Anzio that he sustained a grave injury to his leg, an injury that would never fully heal and would follow him quietly and persistently throughout his acting career. He was just 20 years old when the war carved its mark into him. After being evacuated and enduring multiple surgeries, he was honorably discharged in early 1945. For his bravery, he received the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, tokens of valor that he rarely spoke of in public, but kept close throughout his life. In truth, they represented something deeper than recognition. They were reminders of sacrifice, of survival, and of a chapter that shaped the inner steel of the man he would become. War, as it often does, left scars, but it also lit a new path. In the aftermath of injury and loss, James returned home not with bitterness, but with quiet determination. He had seen the worst the world could offer, and emerged with his dignity intact. And somewhere in that long, uncertain stretch between discharge and direction, the idea of acting, a world away from rifles and rations, took root. He had no plan, no agent, no easy road. Just a dream, a voice deepened by experience, and a body still learning how to carry the weight of its wounds. After the war, with his military uniform folded away and his walking stride still marked by the leg wound from Anzio, James Arness set his sights west. Hollywood was a long way from Minneapolis, both in distance and in spirit, but it called to him in a quiet, persistent way. In 1946, with no connections and little more than resolve, he hitchhiked to California, determined to find a new life among the studios and sound stages of post-war America. He began not in leading roles or star-studded productions, but in small parts, radio gigs and walk-ons that paid little but offered something even more valuable, a foothold. His deep baritone voice and imposing 6'7" frame stood out, earning him early attention in local theater and eventually on the big screen. His official Hollywood debut came in 1947's The Farmer's Daughter, where he played the brother of Loretta Young's character. It was a modest beginning, but it marked the start of a career that would quietly gather momentum. The 1950s were a prolific decade for Arness. He appeared in a range of films: Battleground, Roses Are Red, Sierra, Wagon Master, cutting his teeth in genres that stretched from noir to science fiction. But it was his towering near-alien presence in The Thing from Another World, 1951, playing a hulking extraterrestrial menace that etched him into the memory of genre fans. It wasn't a role heavy with dialogue or emotional nuance, but it showcased the physical presence that would become his signature. Then came A Stroke of Fate, delivered not through a casting agent, but through a friendship. By the early 1950s, Arness had caught the attention of John Wayne. The Duke, as he was known, was already a towering figure in the Western genre, and he saw something in the quiet, wounded veteran. The two men became friends, drawn together by a shared stoicism and deep respect for the American frontier mythos. It was Wayne who introduced Arness to producers and directors, and eventually, it was Wayne who personally recommended Arness for the role that would change everything. Marshal Matt Dillon in a new television adaptation of the popular radio drama, Gunsmoke. In a rare and generous gesture, Wayne even filmed the introduction for the show's premiere episode, assuring viewers that this new actor, unknown to many, was the right man for the role. "Watch this man," he said. "He's going to be a big star." Wayne wasn't wrong. Though Arness would soon carve his own legacy, separate from the shadow of his friend, he always credited Wayne as the one who opened the door. It was a gesture of trust, not just in talent, but in character. And it was character, not charisma, that would come to define Arness's on-screen and off-screen life alike. Hollywood had many rising stars in the 1950s, but few had taken the path Arness had. From the battlefields of Italy to the backlots of Los Angeles, his was a journey shaped not by ambition alone, but by endurance, loyalty, and a quiet kind of grace. When Gunsmoke premiered on CBS in 1955, few could have predicted the seismic shift it would create in American television. Adapted from a successful radio series, the show promised grit, realism, and moral complexity, qualities rare in the television landscape of the time. At the center of it all stood James Arness, cast as Marshal Matt Dillon. Towering in stature but measured in tone, Arness didn't just play the part, he embodied it. From the very first episode, audiences were drawn to his calm authority, his unwavering sense of justice, and the quiet sadness that seemed to sit just behind his eyes. Unlike the flashy cowboys or singing ranch hands of earlier westerns, Arness's Dillon was a deeply human figure, resolute but worn, brave but burdened. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he was always the one you trusted to do what was right. The chemistry among the main cast was part of the show's enduring charm. With Milburn Stone as the gruff but loyal Doc, Amanda Blake as the resilient saloon owner Miss Kitty, and Dennis Weaver as the affable sidekick Chester, Gunsmoke created not just a series, but a world, one that felt lived in, weathered, and real. At its heart, that world revolved around Arness's Marshal Dillon. Gunsmoke was not an instant phenomenon. It took time to find its audience, but when it did, it soared. By its second season, it was the most watched show on television, holding that position for 4 straight years. Arness became a household name, though he never courted fame in the traditional sense. He rarely gave interviews, shied away from the Hollywood social circuit, and preferred time with his family over red carpets. While others chased fame, he remained grounded in the quiet routine of work and home. Behind the scenes, the physical demands of the role were considerable. Arness's old war injury flared up regularly, especially during horseback scenes, but he rarely complained. He saw the job as a duty, one he performed with the same sense of resolve that had carried him through the battlefield years before. His stoicism became both a personal code and a professional asset. Over the course of 20 seasons and more than 600 episodes, Gunsmoke became one of the longest-running scripted primetime shows in television history. Through it all, Arness remained the anchor, never missing a season, never replaced, always steady. Even after the series ended in 1975, he reprised the role in 6 made-for-television movies, continuing the story of Matt Dillon well into the 1990s. There is a quiet power in consistency, and that's what Arness gave to Gunsmoke. Not just a performance, but a presence. In an era when television was still finding its voice, he gave it something more enduring. A moral compass, a sense of integrity, and a character who never had to shout to command a room. As the years wore on and the dust of Dodge City finally settled, James Arness stepped out of the limelight and into a life of deliberate stillness. He didn't choose the sprawling estates of Beverly Hills or the showy high-rises of Sunset Boulevard. Instead, he settled into a refined single-story residence nestled quietly in Brentwood, a place where roses bloomed without needing an audience, and the only applause came from rustling trees and birdsong. The house, modest in scale compared to Hollywood standards, was a study in tasteful restraint. Measuring just over 2,400 square feet, it offered comfort without ostentation. Shielded behind an automatic gate and framed by manicured hedges and mature fig and citrus trees, it was a space designed for peace. Here, Arness could walk barefoot through the garden without being recognized, could sip his morning coffee in the soft light without ever feeling watched. Inside, vaulted ceilings and exposed wooden beams gave the home a rustic warmth. Light poured through large windows and skylights, casting golden patterns across hardwood floors that bore the weight of years without fanfare. A two-sided fireplace stood at the heart of the home, joining the living and dining areas in quiet elegance. Nothing was extravagant, but everything was intentional. In the spring, wisteria vines would burst into purple bloom over the back deck, offering a touch of color to the otherwise earth-toned calm. The deck itself was a favorite spot for Arness, where he could sit beneath the canopy of blossoms and feel far removed from the demands of a world that had once pulled him in every direction. The kitchen, outfitted with a professional-grade stove and surrounded by generous counter space, reflected his quiet appreciation for function over flash. The master suite, positioned at the rear of the home for added privacy, served as a retreat within a retreat. With its own access to the deck and views of the garden, it offered serenity that went beyond mere square footage. There were other rooms too, spaces for guests, for writing, for simply being. Each one carried the echo of a man who had learned the value of silence. Outside, a newly laid lawn bordered a stone patio and a gentle fire pit. There was a pool, of course, but not the kind that screamed for parties or a spectacle. It was tucked beneath trees and accented by a soft waterfall, more oasis than centerpiece. And in a small corner of the yard, a separate garage had been carefully converted into a studio space, ready to become whatever was needed, a workshop, a library, or simply a place to be alone. This was not the home of a celebrity looking to impress. It was the home of a man who had seen war, endured fame, suffered loss, and emerged with a deeper appreciation for the quiet hours. In Brentwood, James Arness built more than a house. He built a life of quiet dignity, a space where the noise of the world was held at bay, and where peace, at last, could bloom. Far from the California sun and the fragrant gardens of Brentwood, another chapter of James Arness's life stood frozen in time, cloaked not in serenity, but in silence. In Minneapolis, the city of his birth, a grand mansion once echoed with promise. Stately and commanding, it rose from the landscape like a monument to an era now past, its brick exterior whispering of elegance, its shuttered windows guarding memories now long faded. The home was magnificent in scale, 8,000 square feet of crafted detail, with 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and no fewer than 6 fireplaces, each one once a centerpiece in rooms designed for warmth, conversation, and family life. It was a house that seemed made for winter gatherings, quiet study, and the sort of refined comfort that spoke not of wealth for its own sake, but of a life well lived. One of its most unique features, and perhaps most symbolic, was a hidden library tucked behind a false wall, almost as if it were guarding secrets. To step into such a space was to feel the presence of the past pressing gently on the present. It called to mind a different kind of Hollywood mystique, one not lit by flashbulbs, but by the soft glow of reading lamps and the rustle of old pages. There was also a billiards room, no doubt once the site of laughter and long conversations, and a summer gazebo on the grounds, shaded beneath sprawling trees. Outside, the lawn stretched wide and green, hinting at the possibilities once envisioned there, of children playing, of friends gathering, of lives unfolding with grace. But after Arness's passing, the house began to change. Without his quiet stewardship, the edges began to fray. Paint faded. Vines crept where they had not been invited. The once proud pool fell into shadow, its water stagnant and still. What had once been a home of grandeur slipped slowly into disrepair, and in time, it was left entirely. Its rooms growing colder with each passing year, its beauty now obscured by time and neglect. It is a sorrowful sight, this house of forgotten grandeur. And yet, even in its abandonment, there remains something profoundly moving. The bones are still good. The light still falls through the tall windows in late afternoon, just as it always did. The carved staircases, the fireplaces, the hidden doors, they remain, waiting for someone with the patience and vision to revive them. In many ways, the mansion stands as a metaphor. It reflects not just the passing of a man, but the slow fading of an era that once held different values, where dignity mattered more than attention, and where a home was not a showpiece, but a sanctuary. Perhaps, one day, the house will live again. But for now, it rests in quiet slumber, carrying the weight of a legacy both noble and incomplete. Though James Arness was never one to seek the spotlight off-screen, his quiet generosity revealed a deeper dimension to the man who so often played unshakable figures of justice. Unlike many of his peers, he never turned his charitable work into a performance. There were no lavish fundraising galas in his name, no press releases announcing donations. Instead, his acts of giving were like everything else about him, measured, sincere, and enduring. One of his most significant philanthropic gestures came in 1968, when he donated his farm, an expansive property valued at over $2 million, to the Brandeis Bardin Institute, a center for Jewish learning and cultural preservation. The donation was made with little fanfare, yet it instantly made the institute one of the most well-endowed Jewish educational centers outside of Israel. Over the years, the Brandeis Bardin Institute would evolve and merge into what is now the American Jewish University, carrying forward Arness's legacy of education, inclusivity, and cultural heritage. It was not simply a gift of land, but a gift of possibility for students, scholars, and future generations. This generosity was not an isolated act. Arness remained deeply connected to his identity as a World War II veteran. He understood, in a way only fellow servicemen could, the burden soldiers carried long after the battlefields were left behind. His support of veteran organizations like the American Legion was more than symbolic. He gave of his time, his resources, and his presence, attending events and quietly offering assistance to help veterans reintegrate into civilian life. These were not gestures of obligation, but of shared experience, wounds understood, sacrifices honored. He also extended his compassion to causes often overlooked by others in his profession. Children's charities, especially those focused on education and health, received his support. Though records of specific contributions are limited, reflecting his preference for privacy, it was well known within his circles that he quietly championed programs designed to give underprivileged youth a better start in life. In this, he once again lived by a principle that had shaped much of his personal and professional identity: service without recognition. Arness's empathy stretched further still, encompassing the lives of animals. Like many who have suffered quietly, he possessed a tenderness for creatures without a voice. He supported animal welfare organizations devoted to the humane treatment of both domestic and wild animals. Whether through donations or advocacy, his concern was genuine. For him, the measure of a society was found in how it treated its most vulnerable, and he included animals among them. Later in life, he also began supporting medical charities, particularly those focused on cancer research and treatment. Having lost loved ones to the disease, he understood the cruel toll it could take, and his contributions helped fund both awareness and progress in treatment options. It was one more way in which Arness turned personal pain into collective good. His philanthropy may not have made headlines, but its impact was lasting. Through quiet acts of kindness and unwavering loyalty to the causes he believed in, James Arness proved that a hero's greatest role isn't always played in front of a camera. While James Arness projected strength and certainty on screen, his personal life was shaped by tenderness, devotion, and the kind of heartbreak that quietly shadows even the brightest success. His journey through love and family was filled with moments of joy, but also marked by profound sorrow, reminding us that behind every great man is a story rarely told in full. In 1948, he married Virginia Chapman, an aspiring actress with a warm spirit and a young son from a previous relationship. James adopted her son, Craig, raising him as his own. Together, they had 2 more children, a daughter, Jenny Lee, and a son, Rolf. For a time, they lived the image of a close-knit, ambitious Hollywood family, carving out a life just as Arness's career was beginning to take shape. But the pressures of fame and the private complexities of marriage slowly took their toll. By 1963, the couple divorced, a difficult and painful decision, particularly as James took on full custody of their children. The years that followed were trying ones. In 1975, tragedy struck when Jenny Lee passed away at just 24 years old. Her death, believed to be from an overdose, devastated Arness. The grief of losing a child, especially one so young, left an indelible mark. 2 years later, his former wife Virginia also passed, her own life cut short by addiction. And in 2004, his eldest son Craig succumbed to cancer, leaving behind a legacy of his own as a respected photographer and founder of a prominent stock photography agency. To lose a child, a former partner, and then another child over the course of 3 decades would test the heart of any man. But James bore his grief the same way he had borne war wounds and fame, with silence, with resilience, and with a quiet grace. He did not speak often of these losses, nor did he use them to garner sympathy. He carried them, as he did so many things in life, inwardly and with dignity. Yet even amid sorrow there was light. In 1978, Arness found lasting companionship in Janet Surtees, a gentle and steady presence who brought peace to his later years. They married quietly, without fanfare, and remained devoted to one another until his passing. With Janet, Arness seemed to find the kind of tranquil domestic life that had eluded him in earlier decades. Their home in Brentwood became a place of solace, a world away from sound stages and scripts, where he could live not as a star, but as a husband and father. Physically, he faced ongoing challenges. His injured leg, damaged in the war, remained a source of chronic pain throughout his career. Yet he rarely complained. Even on long shooting days, when horseback scenes aggravated his old wounds, he pressed on. That perseverance, both physical and emotional, defined him. In love, in loss, and in the quiet strength he showed through it all, James Arness revealed a humanity that few ever saw in full. He was not simply a marshal on a television screen, but a man who loved deeply, suffered quietly, and endured. As the sun slowly set on a life lived with uncommon strength and restraint, James Arness entered his final chapter with the same quiet dignity that had defined him for decades. By the time he reached his late 80s, the towering figure once known as Marshal Matt Dillon had long since stepped out of the limelight. His days were no longer governed by call times or scripts, but by simpler rhythms, mornings in the garden, afternoons with family, and the soft hush of Brentwood evenings. He had aged gracefully, though the decades had brought the usual wear to his body, especially the lingering pain in his leg. There was no dramatic illness, no prolonged struggle. His business manager, Jenny Fazer, would later describe his passing as peaceful, no illness, nothing unusual, she said. He was just tired, I guess. It was a farewell that echoed the man himself, unhurried, understated, and surrounded by the familiar comforts of home. James Arness passed away on June 3, 2011, at the age of 88. He was not alone. His wife, Janet, who had stood beside him for over 3 decades, remained at his side. His surviving sons, Rolf and Jim, carried the weight of his legacy not only as heirs, but as keepers of a story deeply rooted in both public admiration and personal integrity. And yet, in his final act, Arness offered one more gift, one final message that would outlast his earthly presence. Before his passing, he penned a letter intended for release only after his death. When it was finally published on his official website, it revealed a man full of gratitude, humility, and love. "I had a wonderful life and was blessed with so many loving people and wonderful friends," he wrote. He thanked his fans, not just for watching Gunsmoke, but for staying with him through the many phases of his career. He spoke fondly of his time on the thing, how the West was won, and the people he had worked with along the way. There was no self-praise, no dramatic final words, just a calm, heartfelt appreciation for a life that had far exceeded his expectations. Arness was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, a resting place for many Hollywood legends. But unlike some, his grave became not a shrine of celebrity, but but a simple marker of a life well lived. Fans occasionally leave flowers, tokens, and quiet notes of remembrance, but the true monument to James Arness lives not in stone, but in memory. His was a farewell without spectacle, without lights, without applause. And yet it resonates, because in a world so often preoccupied with noise, James Arness chose stillness. He chose a quiet goodbye. And in doing so, he reminded us that greatness does not always shout. It often whispers. In the final tally of lives lived under the glow of Hollywood's spotlight, some names rise not for their noise, but for their quiet gravity. James Arness was one such man. He didn't dazzle with scandal or chase headlines. He did not reinvent himself for every passing trend or court the ever-shifting gaze of fame. Instead, he stood firm, steady as the marshal he played, and just as principled. He gave the world a character who embodied decency, calm leadership, and unshakable fairness. For 20 years, audiences returned week after week not just for gunfights or saloon showdowns, but for the quiet assurance that Matt Dillon would always do what was right, no matter the cost. That same steadiness existed off-screen too, in the way Arness treated his craft, his loved ones, and the causes he supported without fanfare. And yet, his story was not without sorrow. He bore the kind of grief that leaves few untouched, burying a child, losing a marriage, and enduring physical pain that never fully left his side. But he bore it all with grace. Never bitter, never boastful. The resilience he modeled on screen was forged in his real life, tested not by scripts, but by the unpredictable hands of fate. His philanthropy was quiet but generous. His home, both in California and in his native Minnesota, reflected not extravagance, but care. And in the end, even his farewell to the world was written in gratitude. Not for fame, but for friendship, family, and the life he was allowed to lead. James Arness reminded us that heroes don't always wear capes or command attention. Sometimes they wear boots dusted with trail dirt, speak sparingly, and carry pain with quiet dignity. He reminded us that true strength is not loud. It is patient. It is kind. It is knowing when to act and when to simply stand firm. Today, his name may not be spoken with the same frequency as some of his contemporaries, but his impact endures. It lives on in reruns that still grace television screens across the world, in the quiet reverence of fans who still write letters and visit old filming locations, and in the legacy of a man who, when the cameras turned off, chose a life of substance over spectacle. As the years continue to pass and the golden age of television drifts further into memory, it's worth pausing now and then to remember the ones who shaped it, not just with performance, but with character. James Arness was one of those rare few. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.